Hello, everyone, and welcome to Public Health in Real Life. I'm Ashwin Kadambi. We are here today to talk about building sustainable partnerships in global health. And when we speak about partnerships, there are a variety of partnerships in global health, including public-private partnerships, NGO to NGO partnerships in a consortium style. Then we have NGO MOH partnerships, and recently, there is increasing conversations about giving local players not voice but authority to translate these global partnerships into local business model. And whether we speak about neglected tropical diseases or non-communicable diseases, HIV, malaria, supply chain management, human resources for health, all these areas require uh, that we ensure that these partnerships translate from global partnerships into local sustainable business models. And it requires additionally expertise in public health as well when creating these partnerships, and a deeper understanding about the health outcomes and health areas the partnerships will impact in the long run. And that's why we are lucky to have today Jessica Daly to talk about this topic, who understands not about the underpinnings of partnerships, but also about the underpinnings of the or the concepts behind the global public health that affect these partnerships and affect these health systems positively. So with no further ado, let me pass on this virtual podium to our co-hosts who will introduce the guest, and looking forward to an engaging conversation. At this time, we also remind our audience to please post your comments and questions on the chat box to the side, and looking forward. Over to you, Marius.
Thank you, Ashwin. Hello, everyone. I am Marisu, honored to co-host this program. I'm a PhD candidate at the Catholic University of Central Africa in Yaoundé, Cameroon. I am curious learning about translating global health partnership into sustainable solutions. Thank you. Over to you, Kelvin.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Kelvin Turner. I'm just very excited to be on this program with you all. Today we have an amazing guest, as Ashwin said, Ms. Jessica Daly. She's the Director of Global Health at Medtronic Foundation, where she leads strategic partnerships to improve outcomes and health equity for underserved populations. Previously, Jessica led global partnerships for the U.S. Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, including private sector engagements in the Ebola crisis in West Africa, and she directed public-private partnerships for the U.S. government and global HIV/AIDS prevention, care, treatment programs. She began her career as a Peace Corps volunteer in the rural Guatemala, serving a community that remains part of her passion today. Subsequently, implemented several USAID-funded initiatives to improve the health for women and children across Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Jessica holds her bachelor's from Wesleyan University and an MPH from Johns Hopkins. She volunteers time in her community with her two daughters and serves on the board of directors of Rainbow Health Minnesota, an organization dedicated to improving access and outcomes for people who experience injustice at the intersection of health and identity, particularly the LGBTQ plus community, those at risk of and living with HIV. Jessica, it's a pleasure to have you. Welcome.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you for that kind introduction. I'm really pleased to be with you all this morning.
Yes. So Jessica, as I was reading through your bio, I was just delighted about all that you have accomplished and how you've gotten here so far. One thing that came to mind, there's a lot of talk about driving grassroots level entrepreneurship at a local level to sustainably increase the capacity of health systems in low and middle income countries. So to give local players the authority, there's also dialogue about decolonizing global health. How can global health organizations balance these concepts while also supporting the betterment of health systems and LMICs through partnerships?
Well, that's a great question, and thank you for posing it, Kelvin. I like how both you and Ashwin put it, that we're in a moment where we're not just trying to elevate the voices of local organizations, we're really trying to drive their authority and decision-making power in building sustainable systems of change. And I think there are a lot of dimensions in your question in terms of how to do that in a sustainable way. I can say one of the things that I have seen is the greatest potential for both innovation that meets the needs of the people served by the health system, and the opportunity to create that in a sustainable fashion, meaning it's financed and can continue beyond sort of the life cycle that's envisioned in a funded period. At the heart of that really is local ownership. And some of the challenges with that can oftentimes be, how do you scale something that is locally owned so that we get the maximum benefit from what's working? And in public health, that's always our mission, right? We're always trying to ensure that we are driving population level change, and are not isolating improvement to, an individual or a clinic, right? We're really trying to ensure that we have much broader benefit. And so I think we've seen a range of models that can work. I really do think that a ground up approach where you have entrepreneurs and you have local health systems kind of designing what works for them allows you for the most flexibility. And I think that we need to find more ways of supporting local organizations to deliver that change. I think that they can be supported by sort of a middle sector, an approach that connects them with academics, where some of what's working can help be disseminated through the published literature. Also, there are, then that can help with other sources of public and private financing. And then there is sort of a more top-down approach that relies on capital investors or policy change, kind of big picture streams of investment that come at a higher level. And I think that is always best informed by a serious focus on what has worked at the local level and how that change has enacted locally. And there are some great resources on this. I'm happy to share some in chat, but there was recently a piece by Charles Holmes in Think Global Health that I think really captures the idea of how important it is to support local organizations and why that's our best bet for the future of public health, and a little bit of how to do it, including, following policies like the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief has done to set a goal of 70% of all of their funded partners will be local organizations. That's something we've also tried to do through our philanthropic approach at Medtronic Foundation. So I'm happy to share more about any of those approaches.
Yes, thank you. We would love to be able to share some of those references with our audience as well. In your answer, you talked about that kind of top-down approach. I think like in the global health sector, we see, apart from a few alliances, that companies, they tend to grab to more recently the SDGs to work on, based on their own missions, their own interests, their own capacities, and they start implementing change through NGOs. Sometimes this can lead to a more siloed approach, fixing a particular problem. I like to think of it as like putting a Band-Aid on almost a gunshot wound, because it's not solving the entire problem. But how, in your thought process, how can companies move beyond these traditional approaches to make their clear, concrete contributions more in line with the broader development goals of the countries?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question in health. And so I'll offer some thoughts. I definitely don't have the full answer for that. But, I can say one of the nice things about the Sustainable Development Goals is, because there are 17 of them and they are cross-sectoral, and they recognize the deeply interconnected nature of development and social justice and the missions that most of us are on. You can always find a way of kind of, I guess, implementing in your silo. So for me, that's always really been health. and a broad range of, even if you take Sustainable Development Goal 3, right, and you look at all of the sub goals underneath it and the targets and the like 124, your audience can correct me how many indicators we actually have under just Sustainable Development Goal 3, there's a lot of work to be done in that silo. And I think a lot of benefit to come from having that focus and from bringing players that have like clear self-interest in that focus. And I think a lot of the companies that are engaged in public health have a clear interest in developing markets, in strengthening provision of care, because it actually allows for broader access to services and products. And along with governments and others, that actually can be a powerful thing, that kind of focus and that kind of self-interest. But I think critically to go with it is transparency. So I think it's very important that all of the organizations that are engaged in partnership activity or their own giving to NGO partners, as you described, or others, are transparent in their intent and their motivation, and that we can make sure that where the self-interest aligns, we're aware, and where it doesn't, we have risk mitigating strategies to ensure that we remain focused on the populations that we're serving first, because I do think that always has to come first. But then from there, building that out and doing it well means you can look for the points of connection to a broader development agenda. So in health, for example, obviously the connections to gender equity, the connections to sustainable access to education, to housing, to the climate change agenda, and to Goal 17, which is public-private partnership. You can find these points of intersection really in sort of any domain. And I think that that's important to do, and to stay focused on your goals in health, your measurable improvements, how you're improving on that target and helping to reach the same goals through your own indicators and your programs that align, and that we understand how it affects the broader agenda through the broader ecosystem and framework that the Sustainable Development Goals allow us. I do think, all of these were conceived pre-COVID, the Sustainable Development Goals agenda. And I think this is an important moment for us to reflect on a major health crisis that dramatically impacted every one of the Sustainable Development Goals, how far that may have set us back in, for example, poverty alleviation and food insecurity. And what we need to do now to ensure that we recover holistically, because it has been such a, and we're still in the middle of it. It feels in the US like we're emerging, but globally we are not. And so how do we look at what a major threat in one of the Sustainable Development Goals, how that has impacted all of us and all entities that operate in these ecosystems, whether they're governments or companies or nonprofit organizations, or local entities, national, global. How do we find our piece and contribute to a broader goal? And I think COVID is really going to put to test whether or not this conceptual framework of the Sustainable Development Goals can really carry us through to 2030.
Thank you.
Wow, Jennifer, those were really insightful. So we want to know, you have implemented several donor-funded initiatives. And now, how can partnership ventures scale from a development donor-funded program to a sustainable local business model?
Yes, thank you for that question. I have been part of several donor-funded initiatives. So really in my role working in the US government, I worked for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, and I was leading public-private partnerships and working across USAID, but also CDC and the range of US government agencies that were involved in our response to HIV prevention, care, and treatment globally. And so I would say with USAID, but with other agencies as well, sustainability was really at the heart of what we were trying to do through those partnerships and implementation models. It's always at the first part of the design, but it has to continuously be something we're checking in on. Were our assumptions about how this effort could be sustained holding, or do we need to pivot? And there are certain programs actually that the reality is, the infrastructure that was required to launch the program at the beginning. I'm thinking of a HIV prevention partnership that we did for young people. And we use multimedia, we use lots of different strategies to reach young people with key messages in almost a social marketing way that could align the behaviors with safe behaviors with cool. And so a lot of times the private sector is really good at that, but some of the kinds of things that were required infrastructure that actually couldn't be sustained. And so we needed to work again with local partners to really ensure that we were learning and adapting and had a flexible enough implementation plan that we were not constrained by waiting for example, for the whole program to be implemented and an evaluation to come out 2 years later to tell us that actually we couldn't sustain it. We needed earlier indications, not only of sustainability, but actually of benefit. There are other models. We also, for example, worked on a partnership for TB diagnostic, multi-drug resistant TB diagnostic that also required infrastructure. We needed to get a number of lab kits out, machines out, and then the cartridges that are used to detect multi-drug resistant TB were really the innovation in that technology, but they were also very costly to be able to disseminate to large populations at the level that we needed to do. And so one of the things that we worked on was bringing USAID together with PEPFAR and others and the company that produced the cartridges to buy down the R&D costs, meaning they would get to their cost recovery at an accelerated rate, so that they had planned to drop the price of the cartridges 5 years out. They were able to drop it 1 year out, and as opposed to 5 years. And so that actually was a solution that I think was sustainable because it allowed for the products to be rolled out much more quickly. And it had a large benefit because we were able to diagnose many more people with multi-drug resistant TB at an earlier stage. And that obviously has huge public health benefit. So that's an example of a sustainable model where the incentives aligned, but they had, again, coming back to an earlier point, they also had to be transparent from the very beginning. Our interest was getting that diagnostic out, getting it to as many people as possible. The companies was recovering their R&D costs and being able to build a sustainable price model.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much, Jess. So equally, Dr. Jane Nelson, an international expert in corporate social responsibility, in one of her interviews quoted, "Partnership happens because of institutional support, but they succeed because of individual leadership." So what's the role of leadership in driving partnership success?
Critical. So I agree with Dr. Jane Nelson, and I'm really glad that you pulled forward that support, or that quote. I would support it, saying that I think every successful partnership that I've been a part of had strong support from leadership. And this is, I think, also connected to some of the themes of our discussion today, which is that, when you understand the incentives and the agendas of the organizations that are entering into a partnership, when they are tightly aligned, they're going to be aligned to a business strategy, to an organization strategy. And when you are most successful, I believe that's the partnership is really in the sweet spot of what it's going to take to move some of that strategy forward. And a leader will need those kind of partnerships to be successful, or will see the opportunity and will empower the teams working in that partnership to run. Knowing that you have your leadership's support and encouragement to execute, but you know what success looks like, and that's been defined in the upfront stages of a partnership development. And for a leader, understanding what success will mean for the business, for the strategic operations of that organization, means you have the right foundation to build. Then I also believe that everyone who's playing a part in that partnership, whether it's the head of an organization, a program manager, a monitoring and evaluation specialist, there's an opportunity for every one of the people who are playing an active role in that partnership to lead from where they sit. And that's the other ingredient that is really critical. I think that's, if I parse her quote a little bit, she says individual leadership, right? And so that means we all find the leadership voice within us that shows us the direction, how we contribute to the momentum of the partnership, to the success of the partnership. And we act on that voice proactively and with confidence. And I think when that happens, that can be the real magic of a partnership, when you see that it's a team effort, it's a collection of individuals who are leading with their best efforts, but that they had a clear vision of where they were going and understood what success meant in the context of that partnership. I think that's really when the magic happens.
I agree, Jessica. Looks definitely we need that kind of character when creating these partnerships, and this character of the organization is very beautifully encapsulated within the credo of the organization. Some companies have their own credo, which then defines their corporate social responsibility initiatives. And then there are other companies that latch on to NGOs to support their CSR activities. And so, and one more point that you raised earlier was about academic partnerships. But even in academic partnerships, they see there's a lot of conversation about decolonization in that arena as well, because authors in high-income countries happen to be in the first authorship and the last authorship. And, do you think each company, from your experience, need to have that kind of a credo for their own their own companies, so they have a direction in which they work, and they have, more importantly, not their interests but their character defining their activities?
Yes, Ashwin, I love that question. I think I believe that we are entering into a phase in which mission-driven corporate sector is really coming to be much more part of what we must do. I think there are so many lessons from the COVID era, from the social justice awakening. I think that we've all seen, from COVID, from the murder of George Floyd, everything that has cascaded from that. It's really reshaping much of our sector, and I mostly can speak to health, right? And I can say for many companies in health, it's not always a leap to have a mission-driven organization, right? We're in the business of innovating for healthcare to improve the health and well-being of patients. That's how these companies make money. And there's a similar approach that many are taking on the sustainability agenda for climate change, and certainly for racial justice and the LGBTQ awareness and diversity and inclusion has become much more not something that is nice to have, but is actually integrated into the way organizations are operating. So I think this, together with kind of moving from just a shareholder framework to the stakeholder framework, to thinking about your employees as your stakeholders, your communities as your stakeholders, your consumers and your clients as your stakeholders. I think this will shape the companies of the future. And I think the nice thing about that is it starts to blend some of the CSR work, which maybe sometimes was siloed as a reputational benefit, into more of the operations of a company. I think that will be the case for many organizations going forward, many private sector companies going forward. But I also believe that, that they will, the private sector will always be one piece of the solution, right? So
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
so it's always it's going to require honestly sophistication with how organizations can partner with large multilateral organizations, with the public sector, the NGOs, and really these local organizations where so much of, bringing our conversation full circle, so much of the sustainable innovation that really will continue to endure beyond a corporate's time will happen. So I think we're moving into an era of that kind of partnership construct, and it's really up for grabs to see who's able to capitalize on it the most, I think.
Sure, beautifully said. And of course, the employees of a corporate entity play a major role, and where they live and communities they live, improving those communities. And so, Jessica, you have a great insight into whether it is public health conversation or corporate social responsibility, or talking about partnerships. What does it mean to shareholders? How do you keep up with the trends in all these fields and keep up with your reading and ensuring that you're up to date? Because there's a lot of students listening, and also young professionals. And what are some of the successful habits that has worked for you?
Oh, Ashlyn, I love that question. I would love to hear from you all how you do that as well, because I'm sure all three of you here have your own methods for keeping current, and I know we all have a continuous learning agenda, right? I certainly do. I personally set aside time every day. I like to start my day with reading an article. I sprinkle it in, sometimes like when I just need a brain break. And my sources of information a lot of times are social media. So this is where your young audience of students probably have better ways of navigating the algorithms than I do. But I learn a lot from Twitter and LinkedIn and just my network. So I think it's really important to build a network of people that are writing interesting things, that are sharing interesting things, and to ensure that you're capitalizing on that to stay current. I also try to, review the peer review journals when I can. BMJ and Lancet both have a global health publication that I like to just get the digest, so I can keep track of journal articles that are particularly in my clinical area or my current field of practice. And then there's a lot happening with other types of publications, online publications. So I mentioned my colleague who published in Think Global Health. I think that's a new one, but they're doing kind of really interesting things too. There are similar kinds of things that are happening really in kind of the sub-communities. So I'm in one for NCDs, for example, but they're
awesome.
My first love is HIV. So I really tend to track a lot of the work coming out of HIV. And then there are just certain moments, like big conferences. And for me, it's always been the World Health Assembly in May and the UN General Assembly in September, when there's a plethora of webinars, there's a lot of blogs, there are different perspectives that everyone has coming out of the WHA. I didn't participate this year, but I read like everyone's perceptions, and that was just as good for me, actually. So I think that those are good ways. Obviously, you'll have conferences for your particular area that is your moment to really learn. But again, with the COVID era, it used to be that you would, you had the one chance to travel to APHA or to the International AIDS Society conference, and now so much of that has been democratized in, I think, really helpful ways. Because even remember going to those conferences, and NCDs is an area because there's not a lot of USAID funding. Those sessions were very poorly attended. So you put all this effort into learning and sharing out at panels, and then there'd be like 8 people in the audience.
Sure.
I knew something wasn't working. I do think that the ability now to be online and to share in Zoom formats and in webinar formats much more organically as part of how we share is a really beautiful thing to have come from this last year.
Sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think it just allows us to be able to just reach a larger audience quicker. But yeah, thank you.
That's true. I mean, there's another sort of aspect to WHA. I don't know if you guys have participated in those conferences. It's the convening of the World Health Assembly once a year in May. And it tends to be because ministers of health travel for that, and like the sort of highest level policymakers, that you get the top of the house for the NGOs and for the, so it's really more of an elite kind of convening, right? And I think that the reality is always coming out of those convenings, the people who need to do the work and who need that knowledge transfer and that knowledge sharing didn't have the benefit of being at the table often. And so I do hope that there is a greater democratization of the evidence and the lessons now that we're more digital.
Yeah.
Very good point. I have a question just in regards to the COVID-19 response. There was a recent Devix article. They mentioned that lessons on how to gain public trust when rolling out vaccinations in low and middle income countries can be learned from other countries such as the US. Are there lessons that you learned from your global health partnerships career to increase vaccine uptake here at like a local level, especially in the southern states, I would say?
Yeah, great question, Kelvin. And I will also invite you in if you have an experience. I don't have an experience with the southern states as much as a lot of our work is. I'm based in Washington, D.C., but a lot of our work is also in Minnesota and California and Puerto Rico for the work that we've been doing. So a couple of thoughts on that. We've been engaged in empowering community health workers as part of the really important connective tissue between communities and health systems. And they have that super key ingredient that you mentioned in your question, which is trust. And so the moment that the vaccine came out, that is not a moment you can build trust. That is a moment you rely on your trusted sources, right? We had the messages worked out here in the US. We had all these plans. We had the benefit of supply. And this was a moment when the messenger is as important, if not more important, than the message itself. So community health worker, and the community health worker model really we built in other settings overseas in more resource constrained settings, but turned out to work very well here in the US in this moment of vaccine uptake because we had trusted sources. Now, it's not just vaccine hesitancy here has not just been an issue of trusting the vaccine. It's also been a logistical issue of getting access. Right? The early days of vaccine rollout, someone described it like the Hunger Games of like trying to figure out what was open where, when you could get an appointment, refreshing websites. This was all, depending on your ability to access the internet, to be able to navigate complex systems of care. There were significant barriers to just getting access to the vaccine that I would argue still persists today, even when we still have a ready supply of vaccine available. So this was, really some of the early lessons I think that we're learning here, that we also were trying to work with our global partners to ensure that we had that frontline health workforce really mobilized to figure out how, what is the most opportunistic way that makes it easy for the populations to access the vaccine. And in some ways, there's a better infrastructure for that in more resource constrained health systems than we had here in the US in our super complex care system that is very difficult to navigate. The other thing I think, if you set the supply issue aside, is really speed. This is our public health challenge in the COVID vaccine issue that I think we had a very tiered system here of who was eligible when, and appropriately so, because we needed to get our health workers covered first, our teachers, our vulnerable chronic populations that experienced the worst of COVID. All of that needed to be prioritized. But, looking globally, it's absolutely unacceptable that our timeline is 2023 to cover a lot of the populations that need to be covered. And this sort of tiered approach of who gets vaccinated when, I just don't think works as well. We have to design it around what is easy for people and how quickly can we reach them, and ensuring that we cut through the supply issues. And I think this is one of the biggest agenda items on the G7 table as we speak.
Definitely. And especially we recently listened to a podcast by Dr. Peter Hotez, a vaccine expert, and that is what he said. And especially in the southern states, there's a lot of misconceptions about vaccination, and there was also a recent protests by health workers in southern states against mandating vaccination. And speaking of misconceptions, this month is Pride Month, and we would like to be one of the first groups to congratulate you for your recent appointment to the board of directors at Rainbow Health, Minnesota. And so, in terms of marginalized communities in the United States, where do you see the greatest gaps in improving health access to the communities?
Yeah, thank you for that question and the opportunity to share a little bit about Rainbow Health Minnesota. So Kelvin mentioned it at the introduction, and I think, Ashwin, you also are sharing with our audience, but this is an organization based in Minnesota that works at the intersection of identity and health access, with a particular focus on the LGBTQ plus community, as well as people of color and those who are at risk or have HIV and sexually transmitted infections, and understanding what a care context looks like, and all the bias that we bring, the kind of different definitions and assumptions that we bring to care delivery. They're really helping to understand those as barriers to quality care, and breaking it down. And also, I think, doing remarkable things to innovate in how we build a revolution around prevention.
Yeah.
So just to give you an example, one of the things that they are doing is making pre-exposure prophylaxis treatment, which prevents HIV for key populations, available to anyone who wants it, easy. So it's like you have a teleconsultation online with a pharmacist and a physician. You then you have a subscription, a monthly supply mailed to you, and you have someone available for your questions. But it just becomes part of your everyday life to be able to use PrEP. And so I think there's no cost. There's no barrier to expanding access to PrEP. And this is bringing kind of new care modalities into telehealth, into the way that pharmacy and online care interact with compassionate care delivery. So I'm really excited about some of the things that they're doing at a state level in Minnesota. And I think that this is going to, for me, open doors into the future of how we need to be building care around people. And again, just making it an easier experience, but also recognizing everything that we bring to that care, and what we need to be able to do to break it down. So I really hope that this is good. These kind of innovations, that, again, this is a local organization, right? This has been a theme in our conversations today about the entities that are really driving the innovation, that are closest to the communities, that are going to be there for those communities no matter what. And I think that's why I love Rainbow Health so much, is that it's one of those kind of organizations, irrespective of what happens with HRSA funding or one large donor or private sector company here, they're committed. And this is part of how we, I think, get to the agenda to end HIV/AIDS in our lifetime. I think it's really within our grasp, and that we've got other health issues coming our way. we can't take our eye off of this one, and especially not at the last mile. So in some places we're getting there, and I think Rainbow Health is just a great example of how we're going to take it to the finish line.
That's really awesome to hear. And especially, you spoke about an excellent point about prevention, and companies are starting to think about more about prevention than treatment in recent past, and especially ensuring that some of these, some of, as much as possible, the lifestyle changes are promoted. More people have access to the health, and companies are also moving from a paradigm of having standing for photo opportunities and press releases to going to do what I think one of these partnership expert, his name is Richard Crespin, I think he works for Collaborate Up. He said to companies that be boring. So there is a lot of boring work to be done in global health. If you especially think about health financing, the tax system, those all impact health, universal health coverage. And if your job is exciting, then you're not doing your job. Maybe he's taking it to the next zone. But anyway, thank you for those insights.
Well, Ashwin, I will just say that because your audience is a public health audience, right? Yeah. And I know the three of you are the same way. Like, it's exciting for us to be in that nerdy, boring space. Like connecting health financing to universal health coverage is like, there's a high degree of technical issue there, and the health service provision side and the financing side, and how those both come together. But when you have a passion for what that can do, then you're like working through your Excel files and you're like your memos and your Zoom meetings and all these boring elements of what it really takes to actually make just incremental progress,
Definitely.
But I think we have to stay connected to the why, why, even through the most boring sides of it, which really, truly, I wholly take the point, because we don't want to just be the flash in the pan and the big numbers and the all of that is like sometimes not very believable, but it looks much better on a slide deck, right? That's not what we're about, though. We are about like the menial tasks that are like what need to get done so that we can fix this piece of the financing puzzle. But I think all of us come to this field with a passion for doing exactly that kind of work, because it's what's going to move us into the generation of people who have access to healthcare, to different kind of healthcare that actually balances holistically the whole person, and that brings equity and all the things that we're trying to do into these models. So it just depends on how you define exciting and where you find the excitement.
Yes. Start with why. Over to you, Marius.
Jennifer, well, it was really awesome. Like, it's really insightful, the discussion. And to this point, like, I was wondering, going through your bio, we see a lot of achievement and remarkable progress. And that brings us to the question that what will shape your choice in global public health, and particularly in partnership?
Yeah, thank you, Marius, for that question. I just personally want to take you back for a moment in sort of my own personal history of what brings me to this work. And for me, it started out, and Kelvin mentioned this in the intro, as a Peace Corps volunteer in the highlands of Guatemala. I was teaching primary school in 3 different schools in very rural settings. And just to give you a sense of what it means to be in those rural settings, in my kindergarten class, I had 35 kids per school. And by the time I was in the same school, my 5th grade class, I worked through the whole elementary school, was 3 kids, and generally 1 girl or no girls in my 5th grade class. So that's, by 5th grade, you've lost the vast majority of your kid. This was in 2003, so it was hopefully it's better now, but slow progress. But 2001. But I had a couple of different students in the course of my time there that had very serious health issues, a congenital heart condition, a baby with hydrocephalus, so the complex health issues. And, it was really the first time that I understood what it meant to not have access to care, to be a mother, to be a community, and to see your child suffering and to have nowhere to go with it. And to me, it was through the course of that, and I worked with this kid, Jorge, and his family over the course of a year to get him access to heart surgery. They were Kaqchikel Mayan. They didn't speak Spanish. So even within the context of trying to get them access to care in Guatemala, we just worked through so many different barriers. I struggled to communicate with them in basic language, but in some ways I felt more connected to them than almost any part of my global health journey. They stay with me, and Jorge is with me. I still have a picture of him. He's on my LinkedIn. He's the reason that I got into this field, and he's my why. When I come back to why do I persist through all of the challenge of my day-to-day and the politics behind everything that we do, it's because this is a human right, and we haven't fixed it. We haven't fixed that one episode of how to get someone access to surgery, how to ensure they have ongoing access to care, how to do it in a way that humanizes the experience for everyone, and to make sure that it's quality. And so, that experience really brought me to global health. It keeps me in global health. The other thing I learned through that experience, and really every other part of my career, is that fixing it requires multiple actors. And it requires multiple actors to be working in a coordinated fashion. And doing that is so much harder than it seems. But I believe that partnership is worth it. And I think it's really the only answer to how we solve the most complex challenges that we're facing in health. And I really believe a lot in the science, the art and the science of how the private sector can come together with the public sector and the NGO sector and communities and people at the end of the day who benefit from this. And I'm sure you all have your own Jorge or your own reason that you are in this work. And I would just say to your audience, you have to keep connecting to that. You have to make sure that because it is going to be hard. This is not a field that was it was made for niceties. This is a challenging field, but you just have to stay fueled through your purpose. And for me, that's it.
And one thing here at Public Health in Real Life, when we interview people, we also look at what's behind them. And I see books behind you. So what is your favorite book that has impacted you?
Wow, my favorite book that's impacted me. I have so many, but I will say one that's right behind me that I read recently is called Hidden Valley Road. It just came out this year, and it's about a family who there were 10 children, and 12, I think, and 6 of them had schizophrenia. And actually, they have served as the basis of our collective research as a family and what we know about mental illness and how much we still have to learn about the brain and how much we need to get better at adapting our models to take care of people who have mental illness. And so, it's a really an interesting book that looks at the nature and nurture argument. Like, is this genetic? Is it, fostered by the environment? And there's a long history to our understanding of what causes mental health crisis, but
definitely
it's obviously, there's a blend of both. And I think we're just at the beginning of understanding the brain and understanding care models that work for people with mental illness. This is another one that's personal to me because I have it in my family and people I care most about. And so I loved this book because it helped me understand the science.
Definitely.
But it also gave me some hope for what can be in the future. And mental health is kind of just making it onto the global health radar in a big way coming through COVID. And I hope that we'll continue to focus and expand access to mental health care as part of our future development. So that's one I'll offer.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Marius, I think you're on mute.
Oh, Jessica, thank you again very much for the insight. And we agree that partnership is really key to responding to global health priorities. So right now, we want to know that who is your model in global health and who are your models in life?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. So I tend to think about, I'm sure like a lot of your audience, I tend to think about like some luminaries in our field and a lot of the really strong women who have made a huge difference in the agenda for global health. And so I think about like Helen Clark and the work that she did for mothers and children and reproductive health previously, but now as part of the COVID panel, or Ellen Sirleaf Johnson and the head of state and how she came through Ebola, but also has helped apply those lessons more broadly. I follow deeply their work. And of course, Melinda Gates and some of the big thinkers, the luminaries in our field, they've all been important models for me, but really the ones who most affect my career and my decisions and my perspectives are much closer to me. So my current boss and mentor and friend is Purvi Bhatt, and she's really helped me shape my worldview and shape she's a very results-driven public health person who understands the company and commercial side and together with the public health side. And so I've learned just a ton from her, and I've also tried to cascade that and make sure that I'm role modeling and sharing and bringing up the future generation. As well as, I've had a tremendous pleasure of working for 2 U.S. Global AIDS coordinators directly. So Mark Dybel and Eric Gooseby, who, worked under different Republican and Democrat. But, they will always have my followership because they were leaders who, knew how to manage the politics in a very political game. We were dealing with big sums of money and something that requires, Congress and global multilateral diplomacy, but also that, their connection to patients and to being in the field and the human rights aspects of HIV was such an inspiring experience that I keep up with a lot of the work that they do and a lot of the leaders that have come from their model, and was really, always focused on outcomes, quality, and equity. And those are just areas that guide my worldview and everything that I do. I really bring an outcomes orientation, but not so much that it can't be flexible, and that we, I think, honestly, since George Floyd, have had a reckoning also with the outcomes piece of it. Like, it's not just enough to be improving outcomes. We really have to understand relative to what, and what did we do to get here.
Sure.
So I think the disparities question has been sharpened, but by a lot of the leaders that we're working with now. And I'm, again, really trying to foster that kind of role modeling for my team, because I think at the end of the day, it's great to follow the big thinkers and to make sure that we're pushing the bounds of our own creativity and inspiring big vision. And I think that's what a lot of these leaders do. And then how you apply that to your practice really comes a lot more from the leaders who are right in front of you, and to stay inspired and to know when you need to be that leader too, when the moment's called for. So that's another theme from today, that individual leadership is so successful in also our partnership model, but in our approach to global health.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, what are some of the lessons learned in regards to, working with the mentors that you just mentioned under different party lines? Because I know politics, can play a large role in how we approach how we approach, addressing global health issues. What are some lessons learned in dealing with the party politics?
Yeah, That's a great question. I think I've been thinking about this a lot recently, having come through the Trump era, and I think we're all still like reflecting on like what was that experience and how did our leaders come through it, especially leaders who are committed to science and public health. And I worked at CDC, so I watched a lot of my colleagues grappling with the pandemic in the middle of a very complex policy and political environment. And I think one of the key lessons coming out of that is sometimes it feels like the only way to move forward is to give a little, even when it comes to truth and science, so that we can appease certain factions and then keep pushing the agenda forward. And I actually experienced some of that in government at different times. We would just sort of kiss the ring almost, so that we could keep our agenda moving forward and really ensuring that we were trying to get as much alignment as possible. I'm at a place now where I feel like the reality is we just need to speak truth and speak truth to power, and to do it in clear and compassionate ways that bring people along. But that we do need to stay grounded in science and truth. And so I think that is, to me, a key lesson. It's not always easy to do, and not all contexts easy to do, and there's high risk that comes with that, right? There can be, but I actually think it's worth taking some of that risk and staying on the side of the public health science that we're studying and are as part of our community. I think that's one. I really think finding productive space for dialogue is another. That collaboration is a really key part of partnerships and creating the place where people are heard. And I'm going to, Ashwin, bring back another topic from your quote from the very beginning when you were talking about local organizations having not just voice but authority. I think also finding places where we're collaborating in ways that allow for people's voice and perspectives and decision-making rights to come forward. In when we have a conflict of perceived truth or science or approach, that we're working through the compromises of how that gets played out in full transparency. So I think that the sort of how we collaborate is the second to making sure that we're staying true to ourselves. And then I guess the last is just again to bring us back to that passion and the why. And I think no matter what, we can always find our way through any challenge when we're really clear on breaking down what we're trying to do and we have a common goal in mind. And sometimes that needs to be narrow. Sometimes that needs to be specific or siloed because we need to make progress on it. And it's the heart of why we're doing what we're doing. And I think sometimes we lose our why. And when we do, it's really worth taking a pause and rescoping and making sure that we're very clear about why we're doing what we are.
Well, thank you so much, Jessica. This has been such a riveting conversation, and especially talking about political willingness, individual leadership, the role of local partners, and also moving from shareholder paradigm to a stakeholder-driven paradigm. This was, definitely such an insightful conversation, and really every individual who is in the partnership realm needs to really think about, even if it is a small conversation from the beginning of a particular project, to include local players in every even minor details and decisions. They should have a say, because even as Benjamin Franklin said, a small hole in the ship is enough to sink the entire ship. So even not neglecting the local players in any of these conversations can mean something like that. So really, thank you so much for enlightening us today, Jessica. I hope this was a good conversation for you too. We hope to have you again for another conversation. As we see with all our guests, it's never there's so much more about our guests who it's not about that just one particular conversation. So we could talk more about NCDs, the role of community health workers, more about leadership. But with the given time, we truly appreciate your coming here today and sharing some of your thoughts.
Well, Ashwin, I will say partnerships is what unites all of it, and it's my most favorite theme. So thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to it. Marius, thank you for your questions and your dialogue. I'm very happy to come back at any time or to be in touch with your audience. Really think it's important that we take care of our global health community. And I just really commend you all for creating a forum to bring more people, particularly more young professionals and new professionals into this field. And for me, networks have been critically important to how I move forward. And I really want to create and foster this community. And so I'm so pleased to have had the opportunity to be with you today. And I look forward to continuing to stay in touch.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Have a great weekend.
I think we do have one comment. One person saying thank you for an informative session. So thank you once again for all our audience members who have been part of this conversation.